Right, welcome everybody to another edition of Gloves Off with Deshi Back Tower. And today we're basically going to look and analyze what exactly is wrong with South African football. And we're going to touch on what Brian Beloy spoke about last week. And I believe sincerely that he's got some really good reasons for the state our football's in at the moment. And let's see if we can expand on that too. One of the things he spoke about was football at grassroots level. And I think that's the difference between football on the one hand and cricket and rugby on the other. I think cricket and rugby pick out those talented players, the players they think will take their careers further, and nurture these kids throughout their schools with the right sort of professional help. That's what happens with rugby and cricket. And I think that's why they've been so successful for such a long period of time. I think with football, generally there isn't much competitive school football to talk about. Something else Brian spoke about as well was the coaching. I think our coaching, it must be said, at that level is not the very best, not anywhere near it. And I think that's a big part of our downfall in the football world.
What do coaches need to do in order to make that better?
Well, I think the coaching is it's also about coach education or education. Having worked in Europe, there's so many differences. It's so much more professional than we are here, and there's just so much knowledge overseas. I think we need to tap into these things and start expanding our knowledge of the game. Yeah.
How would a young coach have access to that kind of education that they have overseas?
Well, I think that's got to be done through the association. And I think there is, not think, but I do know for a fact, there is coach education. I'm just not quite sure if we get into the numbers. And I think maybe that may be the downfall here, particularly with regard to schools and school coaching. There must be hundreds of coaches. And unfortunately, I don't think it's feasible at the moment to get through all of those coaches.
What more can SAFA do in order to aid those young coaches?
Well, I think, I think one of the things is we need to try and get more numbers done. Then we also need to look at the quality of our education. What's changing, what are we learning, what are we not learning. All of these things are vitally important. There's certain unspoken rules as well in football, and these need to be taught and learned.
Can you speak to us a little bit about the administrative aspect?
Look, I think, like Brian touched on, I think a lot of our officials have been in those specific jobs for maybe too long. It's human nature. If you're doing something for too long, you generally fall into comfort zones. You get complacent. And I think that's, as I say, it happens to us all. What I do think we need to do is bring in some of the younger people, some of the younger former footballers, that understand, that have played at a different level, and so would have learned a lot more about administration, coaching, all kinds of things. And then also, don't forget, you need business people. So not necessarily football people, but you need business people to take those business decisions that's going to keep the association successful, keep football in South Africa successful. That's a vital aspect of it as well.
Where have SAFA failed in keeping those ex-professionals in the South African system, either administratively?
Well, I don't think SAFA has failed. I think I don't see any opportunities for younger people coming into the game on an administrative level. And that's not a failure. I think rather it's people haven't moved on and out. You know, people have stuck there and been there for some of the people for too long. And then we also need to look at what people are doing, what their job descriptions are. Are they fulfilling those descriptions? Is that happening? Because that's another very important aspect of the game.
So, what is the purpose of gloves off?
Well, I think Brian Beloy touched on it as well. It's really an opportunity to give people a chance, a platform to speak what they really want to talk about. I think once you're involved, whether it be football, cricket, rugby, whatever, people generally don't want to talk. So here's an opportunity for us to try and help South African football to take it to another level. From 1996, there's a feeling amongst a lot of people that we've basically just gone backwards and downwards. So we haven't really gone forward. And hopefully with people, being able to speak freely, new ideas will come, which will enlighten all of us. And that's the reason for this channel, particularly analysis as well, and analysis is a form of teaching. When you break down a goal situation or a defensive situation, that's how people learn. And really, that's what I've always wanted to be a part of, is to be teaching people. So that's the reason for this channel. As we go along, there'll be other inserts. We're looking at getting some sort of footage from one or two other countries as well, which will give you a nice spectrum or a broader picture of what's happening in the football world.
So, where have you most enjoyed your coaching experience?
I think it's got to be said, overseas in Spain was such an eye-opening experience. The Spanish work and work and work. There's not 1 second on your program that's unaccounted for. Everybody just works so hard, the coaches, the players, and having worked with some real high-profile European players who have won Champions League and all of that, and you see their work ethic, it's just such an eye-opener. I worked with Luis Garcia, Sammy Reyes, Joffrey, played for Barcelona, a goalkeeper from PSG, former PSG goalkeeper, and Borja Fernandez, who grew up at Real, spent a lot of his main career there, and their work ethic is something really that we should look at and try and copy.
So I was just going to ask you, what do they do there that we can do here?
It's, for example, I'll tell you, if once we finish our pre-season in Madrid and we go to India and we start playing, every 3 days or so we're traveling and we're playing a game. These former pros who have already achieved everything, they've played for their countries, they've won Champions League, they've played in other countries. Their work ethic is is absolutely unbelievable. It's you'll walk into a gym the morning of a game in India, and they'll be working, and that's not on our program. So it's all about their work ethic. They know exactly what they need to do to be successful. It's at any level. It doesn't really matter. You know, um, it's just you've got to work, and football teaches us that. All sport, in fact, you know that you work hard at anything. It's like life. You work hard, you'll be successful.
What was the difference in that Indian dressing room at Atletico Kolkata? What made you guys successful?
I think it was the work ethic. I think it was nothing was left to chance. Whoever said what in the change room and when they said it, all of those things were structured. For instance, I got asked to say, I'm generally quite loud in a change room and all of that. And I was told the exact moment when to start saying what I normally say. And it was so precise that I was told that the moment the head coach finishes saying whatever it was he was saying, and I'd be given a word, from that second, I go on with getting the change room going.
So, what would players need to do to then start adapting to increasing work ethics and professionalism?
It's just basically up to the individual. You know that if you want to achieve at anything, you've got to work. There's a lot of, in this game, in every other sport, I would imagine, there's a lot of lonely hours spent. People don't see those lonely hours. But for me, it's the quality of those lonely hours, the number of those hours that an individual puts in that determines how far they go.
What is the actual effect of the support staff around young footballers?
Absolutely vital. I mean, at Atletico, we had at the beginning, at the very first session, we'd have all the Atletico medical staff come out to check players, check uh, body mass, meat, fat content, um, body alignment, all kinds of tests were done. So that's absolutely vital because that does then give you an indication of who would suffer which injuries throughout the season. And those could be prevented with the right biokineticists. And today, I believe biokineticists are vital in any team sport, in any sport at all. They are so advanced, these people, very, very learned, and they can support players, make them stronger, make them better, just by doing little things, and which incidentally I learned from as well. I learned about rehab, I learned about regeneration. We would do regeneration in a pool the next morning for goalkeepers and everybody. And those are the things you learn.
So, I was actually going to ask you about the recovery aspect. So, if you could just touch on, go a little bit deeper.
Okay, so it's very important regeneration when you're playing as many games in such a short period of time. Don't forget, it's not just the game, but I mean, we travel. In India, the distances are huge. So often your travel takes a day, you know. So the regeneration, all of that has to be done properly. And one of the things players did immediately after training sessions, immediately after games, they're in an ice bath, and it's not something you got to tell them or monitor. They do it by themselves. They know exactly what they need to do. Both the Indian and the Spanish players, they know exactly what to do, and they do it. It's going to benefit them personally on a field of play. It's going to make them stronger. The recovery period is a lot quicker. So they know what they must do, and believe me, they go right ahead and do it.
So speak to us about the importance of lifestyle and diet.
Vitally important. In Spain, what you eat, how you eat, very, very, very important nutrition, particularly when you're doing your pre-season training. It's important that players eat properly. We would start with breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd leave for training by 8:45. We'd train from 9 o'clock to 10:15. 10:15 as we're walking off the field, there's fruit, fruit juices, waters, liquids, and that sort of stuff. And then we'll go back to our hotel, straight to the gym, and then a proper lunch, and proper dinners. And then there's snacks left on tables in corridors for players, like nuts, little biscuits, water, liquids, juices, all that sort of stuff. Nuts is a big part of the diet. And just in general, I think the Spanish eat very healthily. Their portions are generally not very big. And why should it be? I mean, you can always go back for more if you want some more. And there was always enough food. So nutrition, very, very, very important. And of course your lifestyle. I mean, there's not much of partying going on. You stay in the camp. It's only once we move to India after our pre-season that players are allowed to do as they please, obviously within reason. And don't forget, professional players understand that if they're not living their lives properly, it's going to show in their performances. So it's vitally important that you do everything within reason.
So how important is the attitude of the player in directly translating to their success?
It's it's absolutely imperative. If a player does not perform, he's going to lose his job, lose his contract. What's going to enhance his performance is his work ethic. And you know that there are certain things that may trouble you through a game. If, for instance, it was for goalkeepers, maybe it's crosses. And these days, crosses aren't played like in my day, where it was just one type of cross that was played into the box. Now it's whipped in, it goes away from goalkeepers, goes towards goalkeepers, it's different heights. So you've got to work at those things. You've got to understand that training sessions don't always provide for all of that aspect of the game. So the certain things that trouble you, you need to work on yourself after hours, after you finish training. That's how it works, particularly with goalkeepers. I remember when I was playing pre-season, right after our pre-season sessions, I'd go back and work with a football. But nobody told me to do that. I knew that I needed to do it.
So I just want to ask you, to digress for a small while, how important is it in today's game that a goalkeeper is able to use his feet?
Vitally important. For the last 3-4 years, I've been trying to tell a lot of our goalkeepers to start receiving back passes outside their box. When I was on a course at St. George's in the UK a couple of years ago, one of the lectures was based on that. And in fact, I had a visitor, a former player that came from the UK, played in South Africa for Arcadia, and then went back and played for Leeds. And he was working at a club just around the corner from St. George's and came to visit me during this lecture. And the lecturer spoke about a game. It was Swindon playing against somebody else. And this mate of mine was at that game And he then partook in the lecture and explained to everybody that he noticed a distinct difference in the two teams. The one where the goalkeeper had been worked on in terms of using his feet, they played much higher up. And I've always believed that that's the way to go, because what it does do, it tends to push everybody up and on a bit, and it closes those spaces down in between, and doesn't allow those spaces for opposition to exploit. So I think it's vitally important. Goalkeepers, I used to, part of my exercises, even in Spain, was using their feet, goalkeepers. So a big part of our warm up and some of our exercises were using your feet, passing balls, and building it up, to get to a point where you can pass a 60-meter pinpoint pass. I believe it makes such a difference to the entire team.
On that point, how important is cross training for that kind of aspect or scenario?
Well, I think these days all players need to be able to do a whole host of things. I don't think it's just one particular aspect. But I think with goalkeeping and with the using your feet, I think they need to be able to play out proper, almost like an outfield player. Gone are the days in my day when if goalkeepers couldn't kick, couldn't pass, it didn't really matter. Now it does. It's a very important aspect of the modern game.
Do you have a story that you can share with us that translates to the conversation we're having?
Well, maybe I can tell you something about Spain, or something that happened in Spain. So I obviously needed to learn to speak some sort of Spanish. I needed to be able to count up, down, right, left, and then eventually I got into it more and more. Garcia, Luis Garcia, told me that when he'd gone to England, when he joined Liverpool, the way he'd learned English, and that was the way I learned it. So I had reams and reams and reams of paper with Spanish words on them and the English meanings. And I got to tell you, it helped massively. I could understand conversations. I could partake in small phrases, in conversations, using small phrases. So that was the one story. But another funny story was Borja Fernandez, who, as I pointed out earlier, grew up at Real, showed me a picture of him and two other youngsters. They were young boys, under 19s, in Cape Town with Table Mountain in the background. And I forget who the third one is, but I do remember he was also one of the big name Spanish internationals. But the other one in the picture was Casillas, the goalkeeper. And when I came back home, I did get in touch with a newspaper in Cape Town to find out if, in fact, Real had been to Cape Town. And yes, they did, is under 19s.
So speak to us about the importance of communication.
Look, I learned very early on when I got to Spain that communication was important. So yes, I got my buenas all wrong sometimes. Buenos dias for buenas tardes. So at the beginning, I made those mistakes, but I carried on. You've got to say, it's like everywhere else in the world. When you try and speak people's language, and it may come across as funny and even daft at times, people are quite keen to help. And some of the physios helped me along. But I've got to say, in my first season, the one goalkeeper, I had three goalkeepers. One was Spanish, didn't speak a word of English. The other one was French, came from PSG, and the other one was Indian, who obviously spoke some English, well, spoke English quite nicely. And I used to start working with a Spanish goalkeeper. And so I needed to learn to speak Spanish. He was the most experienced goalkeeper there, or currently the most experienced. And then obviously the French guy, the Frenchman, had been a top-class goalkeeper. But it was quite funny getting the languages right. I'd be speaking Spanish to the Indian goalkeeper, or to the French goalkeeper, and sometimes I got it hopelessly wrong. Incidentally, I always got it hopelessly wrong. But no, I learned quite a lot. And in fact, telling the story of the goalkeeper, I'm now not going to tell you who the goalkeeper is, but when the goalkeeper arrived, we were sitting down to lunch, and he walked across the dining hall to where the coach's table was to introduce himself and all of that. And as he turned around to walk away, the head coach was not happy. He was not happy with the weight he was carrying. So he had a word with me, and the next morning, I went down and weighed him, and he weighed 101.3, and which really wasn't acceptable to the head coach. And so I wrote out a diet, just a very basic diet. And I got to tell you, eventually he won that tournament for us. He made a save in the top corner in the last second of the game, which we were leading 1-0. So basically, he won it for us. But I've also got to tell you, because he was so heavy, he struggled at training to get up and down and up and down and up and down. So the head assistant and I sat down, and we worked out a program where we would keep him on the floor, keep him working on the floor, and get him up from there without him realizing. And that's what we did. So all our sessions with him were 10, 12 minutes, not longer than that. But it was based on getting him up and down. And I got to say it worked. And just incidentally, he stayed in touch with me throughout. Even when he moved to play for, I think he went to Maccabi Haifa for 6 months or something. He would phone me from Israel. So obviously, we worked nicely together.
Is there an instance where miscommunication led to the point that you were trying to make?
Yes, too often, particularly with the Spanish goalkeeper. So what had happened was the Spanish goalkeeper, Basilio, he wanted to learn English. And obviously I wanted to improve my Spanish. So him and I, during our siesta time, which was from 2 to 4, I think it was, 4:30, we'd take an hour every day from 2 to 3. Basilio and I would sit down, and I would teach him English, and he would teach me some Spanish. So I always got it wrong. I was very slow on the uptake, and needless to say, that's always been the case with me. But I did get it wrong, and there was often times where I shouted things on the training ground, got it hopelessly wrong, and the physios would point it out to me. The physios were younger, and they could speak English, and that helped me as well. But in my second season, the goalkeeper I worked with, Kala Tayud, at one time was one of the top goalkeepers in Europe. He received a certificate and all of that. But I'll tell you, Kala's wife was born in Belfast. She lived in Belfast in South Africa with her mum on a small holding. And she spoke English, and which helped me with Kala Tayud. And as we spoke more and more, his English got better as well. And he spent time, he worked with Douglas, the Real goalkeeping coach, and went to visit them and sent me pictures of all of them. So, yeah, but it was very helpful that his wife could speak English.
Okay, so speak to us a little bit about your Olympic experience with the under 23s in 2016.
Yeah, that was an amazing experience. Just being in Brazil, being at the Olympics was, yeah, an experience of a lifetime, really. And now that our under 23 teams made the Tokyo Olympics, it's they will love and enjoy every single minute of it. I sometimes when I think back, I'm a little bit upset that we didn't qualify for the next round. I think we should have beaten Denmark. We could even have beaten Brazil when we drew 0-0 with them. Incidentally, I'll tell you a story there. I got in touch with Atletico Madrid to find out how they mark and pick up Neymar. And they came back and told us what they do, because they've also got an entire department that only does analysis for them. And they told us how to do it, and then Owen de Gama and I sat down and worked out little training sessions to pick him up. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think he only had 2 shots on goal. One was on target and one was off target. So I think we did that quite nicely. It was no score draw, as I say, and maybe, just maybe, we could have sneaked a win in that game.
So, what would you say was the key to keeping Neymar out the game?
It was just overloading the areas he was in. So basically, if he played on the left-hand side, you'd ensure that that area is overloaded. If he played on the right-hand side, so that's even going forward. We're always looking for somebody to be in those areas if our attack breaks down or we lose it or it gets cleared quickly. So there's always somebody there and close to him, obviously.
So, would you say you came up you came up with this epiphany of how to mark Neymar out of the game, going on a long walk somewhere in Brazil?
No. Well, what had happened, one of the stories, we'd gone out for a meal. Obviously, when you're in hotels and the food is generally the same, and if you stay in hotels for a long period of time, you tend to get a little bit tired. So we went out for a meal, and after the meal, I then decided to get a cab back to the hotel, and then decided it was too expensive, the cab. So I can't tell you what went on in my mind. I thought it was just down the road. Well, I started walking, then running, and some 8Ks later, I got to my hotel. Nobody could believe, even the police couldn't believe that I'd run and walked that distance. And this was evening on a road that I don't know. It was motorway. So yeah, it was a silly thing to do, but still, it was a good run.
Where do you think that under 23 team would have been now had they still been together?
You know, that's what I've always felt, is we don't really nurture players. We don't look after them. We don't put work into looking after them and making them better. For instance, I think that squad, that team, and even the players on the fringes should have been kept together, you know, and then taken to the senior level without without allowing them to go their separate paths and ways and all of that. I just think if we more structured in our approach to looking after younger players, we'll be so much better. Don't forget, as far as natural talent's concerned, we've got some of the best natural talent in the world when kids are little and as they're growing up. But something goes wrong somewhere.
Where does it go wrong?
Well, I think, like we touched on earlier, I think grassroots schools football is lacking massively, and I think our coaching at that level, and even on the senior level, I think sometimes coaches are just are kept for too long, and it's the same coaches from one club to another to another, and I think that's not conducive to bringing in new ideas. I've always said you've got to bring in the young coaches, bring in new coaches. And yes, not all the things we learn from them or they introduce is going to be successful. But even from the things that aren't successful, we all going to learn from it and grow.
So where do you think Rulani Mukwena could have done better at with his time at Pirates?
Well, very hard to say. You know, I think to make that kind of call, you've got to have worked quite close and to know. I just think the whole thing, from the very beginning, when the coach moved on, that was all just too sudden. And for a young coach at that level, a club as big as Pirates, you know, there's just so many different facets that go on into making this club the club it is. It's really difficult for a young coach coming in. His first real job as a head coach. So it was always going to be a tough ask. He needed to also have the right support around him. Personalities, I think, is what he needed as well around him, and he would have grown too. But you know what? He's going to put it down, I have no doubt, to learning experience, and he's going to grow.
So would you think he's ready for taking on the mantle at another club maybe?
Do you know, I think after an experience like this, you maybe want to go to a second division club or a smaller club, and just start there again to get the confidence going. You'll be learning one or two new things. And if you can impart what you've learned in that experience, that instills confidence within you. And that's going to make you a better coach. But I do believe maybe just to step away for a wee bit and then go start with a smaller club or, as I said, a second division club.
Okay, so speak to us about the VAR controversy.
Well, I think firstly, in the modern game, there's definitely a place for it. Yes, there's been talk. It takes away from the action. It's stop-start. I think far more importantly is when blatant mistakes are made. It costs clubs an absolute fortune. It costs people their careers. And I think if you're going to cut that out, then I'm all for it. I think in South Africa, there's no question it's going to be needed, particularly with some of the standard of our officiating. Some of it is poor. It's got to be admitted. And that, like I said, it costs clubs, it costs careers. So if we can get rid of that, I think it will be a really good thing. And I think, you know, we're a big country. There's a lot of money in our football. I can't understand why it cannot be instituted and used and almost from the beginning. Yes, I understand it's massive cost, But I think with the money in the game from just the one television channel, surely there's enough to have the VAR and to start using it and cut out these mistakes. Let's go back to Maritzburg and Sundowns, the Telkom Challenge. Was that a goal?